I still see her eyes, not the eyes of the young woman I knew, but something ancient, black, and utterly devoid of humanity. It's been years since that night, but the memory claws at me, especially when the house grows quiet, when the shadows stretch too long. I try to forget the sounds, the guttural screams that tore through her throat, the way her body twisted into shapes no human form should ever take. They said it was a mental breakdown, a tragic illness, but I was there. I saw the defiance in those eyes, the pure, unadulterated malice directed straight at me. I felt the cold, the oppressive weight in the room, like the air itself was suffocating me. And I heard the voice. Oh God, that voice. It wasn't hers. It was something else, something other, whispering secrets I never wanted to know, secrets that still echo in my nightmares. The voice was a low, guttural rasp, yet it carried a chilling clarity. It spoke of things I thought only I knew, fears I'd buried deep, mistakes I'd made years ago. It mocked me, twisting my insecurities into venomous barbs. It promised pain, not just for her, but for me, for anyone who dared to interfere. I remember trying to rationalize it, telling myself it was stress, a psychotic break, her mind lashing out. But then it would say something specific, something so intimately personal that my blood ran cold. Like the time it mentioned the scar on my knee from when I fell off my bike at 7, a detail I'd never shared with anyone, not even her. Or the exact words I'd whispered to my grandmother on her deathbed. It wasn't just speaking, it was knowing. I tried to tell people, I tried to explain the change in her, the unnatural strength, the way her eyes would roll back, revealing only whites before snapping open, black and hostile. They looked at me with pity, suggesting I was overwhelmed, stressed. Doctors prescribed sedatives, antipsychotics. They called it a severe dissociative disorder, perhaps a rare form of schizophrenia. I brought them to her bedside, hoping they'd see what I saw. But in their presence, she would often lie still, eyes vacant, occasionally mumbling incoherently, never unleashing the true horror. It was as if it knew when to hide, when to retreat into the shadows of her mind, leaving only the shell for the professionals to diagnose. But when we were alone, it would return. The air would grow heavy, the temperature plummeting even in the middle of summer. Objects would shift, subtly at first, a book falling from a shelf, a picture frame tilting. Then it escalated. I saw her levitate just for a second, hovering inches above the bed, her body rigid before crashing back down with a sickening thud. I saw scratches appear on her skin, deep, angry red lines that formed symbols I didn't recognize, symbols that would vanish just as quickly as they appeared. The smell was the worst, a cloying stench of sulfur and decay that clung to everything, permeating the very fabric of the house, no matter how much I cleaned. It was a smell that whispered of something ancient, something unholy. I was exhausted, terrified, and utterly alone. My friends, my family, they thought I was losing my mind. They saw a young woman struggling with severe mental illness and a grieving partner unable to accept it. They urged me to get help for my sake. But how could I explain that the help I needed wasn't for me, but for the entity consuming the woman I loved? I started researching, desperately, late into the night, my computer screen the only light in the suffocating darkness. I read about ancient evils, about possessions, about rituals and exorcisms. I dismissed most of it as folklore, as desperate pleas from a bygone era. But then I found him, a retired priest, Father Michael. His name kept appearing in obscure forums, in dusty old books about paranormal phenomena. He was an outcast from the church, dismissed for his controversial beliefs, but revered by a small, desperate few who claimed he had faced true darkness. I called him. My voice was hoarse, trembling, barely audible. He listened patiently, quietly, without interruption. When I finished, there was a long silence, and I thought he would dismiss me like all the others. But then he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "You're not crazy, my son. You've encountered something truly evil, and it's not going to let go easily." His words, rather than comforting me, sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. He believed me, and that belief suddenly made everything so much more real, so much more terrifying. He told me he would come. He told me to prepare, to pray, and above all, to be strong. Strong? How could I be strong when every fiber of my being screamed to run, to hide, to forget the monstrous thing that now wore the face of the woman I loved? The days that followed were a blur of terror and anticipation. The entity seemed to sense his coming, its manifestations growing more violent, more personal. It knew I had sought help, and it was furious. It wanted me to know that it was waiting. The entity's fury was a living thing. It wasn't just physical manifestations anymore, it was psychological warfare. It invaded my thoughts, planting seeds of doubt, whispering that I was doing the wrong thing, that I was abandoning her, that I was leading her to a worse fate. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow danced with malevolent intent. Every creak of the house sounded like a claw dragging across the floorboards. I barricaded her bedroom door at night, not to keep her in, but to keep it out, a futile gesture that only highlighted my helplessness. She would scream, not the guttural screams of the entity, but her own voice, pleading, begging me to let her out, to hold her. My heart would tear in two, knowing it was a trick, a manipulation designed to weaken my resolve. And then, just as suddenly, the screams would shift, deepening, twisting into unholy sounds, mocking laughter echoing through the thin walls. I stopped eating. My clothes hung loose on my frame. My hands trembled constantly. I was a ghost haunting my own life, waiting for salvation or damnation. I remember one morning, I woke up to find the window in her room shattered, glass strewn across the floor like fallen stars. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, was a single word: mine. My blood ran cold, not just from the message, but from the realization that I had slept through it. I had been so utterly exhausted, so broken, that I hadn't heard a thing. It was taunting me, showing me how vulnerable I truly was. I called Father Michael again, my voice a ragged whisper. He simply said, "Hold on, my son, I'm on my way. I'll be there by sundown." Sundown. The word hung in the air, heavy with foreboding. The house felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick and electric. Every moment stretched into an eternity. I sat by the front door, a crucifix clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles were white. The entity in her room was unusually quiet, a silence more terrifying than any scream. It was waiting too, waiting for him. Finally, as the last slivers of orange light bled from the sky, a battered old sedan pulled up to the curb. A stooped figure emerged, silhouetted against the dying light. Father Michael. He wasn't the imposing fire and brimstone figure I had imagined. He was old, his hair thin and white, his face etched with lines of profound weariness. But his eyes held a depth, a quiet strength that immediately commanded attention. He carried a worn leather satchel. As he approached the door, the air around him seemed to hum, a subtle shift, like a protective aura. I opened the door, and the first thing he did was look past me, his gaze sweeping through the house, his brow furrowing slightly. He didn't offer a handshake, just a solemn nod. "It's strong here," he said, his voice softer than I expected, but firm. He stepped inside, and a shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just the cold he brought with him from the outside. It was something else, a spiritual chill that seemed to momentarily cut through the oppressive heat of the entity. He walked slowly, deliberately, through the living room, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. "The battle begins now, my son," "Are you ready?" Ready? I wasn't ready. I was terrified. But looking at his calm, resolute face, a flicker of something, a tiny ember of hope ignited within me. This wasn't a doctor, a psychologist, or a well-meaning friend. This was a man who understood. This was a man who could see the truth. And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, I felt a faint stir of resolve. I had to be ready for her. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. Father Michael gave another slow nod, then turned towards the hallway. "Stay close," he commanded, his voice now lower, almost a whisper, but imbued with an authority that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He reached into his satchel, pulling out a small, ornate silver crucifix, a vial of holy water, and a worn, leather-bound book. He didn't rush, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. As he uncorked the holy water, a faint, sweet scent like lilies briefly cut through the lingering stench of sulfur. We approached the bedroom door. It was still barricaded from the inside, but the silence from within was deafening. It felt like the eye of a hurricane, a false calm before an unimaginable storm. My hands started to tremble again, and I gripped the crucifix tighter, the sharp edges digging into my palm. Father Michael placed his ear against the door for a moment, then straightened, his eyes closed briefly in concentration. When he opened them, they were focused, intense. "It knows we are here," he stated, not as a question, but a fact. "It is gathering its strength." As if on cue, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the door, rattling the very frame. It wasn't human. It was a beast, trapped and enraged. The air around us grew impossibly heavy, pushing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath fogging in the air, even though it was late summer. Father Michael didn't flinch. He produced a small silver key from his pocket. I had no idea where he got it, and with a swift, practiced motion, unlocked the barricade. The moment the latch clicked, the door burst inward with an explosive force, tearing free from its hinges and slamming against the wall with a deafening crash. A wave of freezing air, thick with the stench of decay, washed over us, making me gasp. Inside, the room was chaos. Furniture was overturned, lamps shattered, the mattress ripped to shreds, springs exposed like jagged teeth. And there, in the center of the destruction, was her. My beloved. She was no longer lying in the bed, but hovering, suspended several feet off the floor, her body contorted at unnatural angles, her head lolling to one side. Her eyes were wide open, black as coal, fixed on Father Michael with an unholy intensity. A sickening wet chuckle emanated from her throat, a sound that tore through my soul. "So, the old man comes to play," the voice rasped, deep and resonant, yet undeniably coming from her lips. It was mocking, dripping with contempt. Her body twitched violently, and then, with a horrifying snap, her head twisted around to face me, a grotesque parody of recognition. "And you, little man, you brought him here. You betrayed her. You betrayed me." A sharp pain lanced through my head, a sudden blinding migraine that made my vision swim. I stumbled back, clutching my temples, but Father Michael put a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "Do not listen to its lies," he commanded, his voice booming now, cutting through the entity's taunts. He stepped forward, raising the crucifix. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you, unclean spirit, to depart." The entity shrieked, a sound that was pure agony and pure rage, a sound that vibrated in my very bones. The room convulsed, and I felt the floor beneath me shake violently. Objects flew through the air, narrowly missing us. The air turned icy cold, then searing hot, then back again, an unbearable assault on my senses. I could feel its hatred, a palpable force pressing in on me, trying to crush my spirit, trying to make me run. But I couldn't, I wouldn't, not now, not when hope was finally here. I couldn't, I wouldn't, not now, not when hope was finally here. Father Michael didn't back down. He stood firm, his voice rising above the cacophony, a beacon of defiance. I cast you out, foul spirit. By the power of Christ, I command you to release this innocent soul. He splashed holy water towards the hovering form. It hissed, a sound like hot metal hitting ice, and the water seemed to sizzle as it hit her skin, leaving behind faint, smoking marks that vanished almost instantly. The entity thrashed, its movements growing more violent, more erratic. Her limbs snapped and twisted, her head whipping back and forth with impossible speed. I wanted to look away, to cover my eyes, but I couldn't. I was transfixed by the horror, by the sight of the woman I loved being torn apart from within. "You speak of Christ," the voice snarled, a grotesque laugh bubbling up from her throat. "Your Christ is weak here. This is my domain. I have feasted on her despair. I have reveled in her pain. She is mine." As it spoke, the room seemed to darken, the flickering light from the single remaining lamp struggling to penetrate the oppressive gloom. Shadows stretched and writhed on the walls, seeming to coalesce into monstrous shapes. I felt a sudden sharp pressure on my chest, as if an invisible hand was squeezing the air from my lungs. My vision blurred at the edges, and a wave of nausea swept over me. Father Michael ignored the taunts. He opened his worn leather-bound book, his lips moving in silent prayer for a moment. Then he began to chant, his voice low and resonant, speaking words in a language I didn't understand, ancient Latin, I presumed. With each word, a subtle shift occurred. The oppressive pressure in the room seemed to lessen fractionally. The shadows recoiled, and the air, though still heavy, no longer felt quite so suffocating. The entity reacted with renewed fury, its screams piercing my ears, making my head throb. It lunged forward, still suspended, but moving with shocking speed towards Father Michael. He didn't flinch. He met its advance with the raised crucifix, pushing it forward as if it were a shield. A blinding flash of light erupted from the crucifix as it made contact with the invisible barrier around her. The entity roared, a sound of pure agony, and recoiled, slamming back against the wall with a force that shook the entire house. For a moment, her body hung limp, eyes closed, and I saw a fleeting glimpse of the woman I knew, a flicker of peace on her face. My heart leaped with a desperate, foolish hope. But it was a trick. Her eyes snapped open again, blacker than ever, burning with renewed hatred. "You wound me, old man," it hissed, its voice now laced with a chilling coldness. "But you cannot break me, not here, not with him watching." Its gaze, sharp as a blade, flickered to me. "He loves her, doesn't he? He truly believes he can save her. How quaint, how utterly delicious." A grotesque smile spread across her face, revealing teeth that seemed too long, too sharp. "Perhaps I will keep her and let him watch as I slowly, exquisitely consume her from the inside out. Every memory, every hope, every dream, gone. And he will be powerless to stop it." The words were a dagger to my heart. My legs threatened to give out, but Father Michael's hand was still on my shoulder, a steady, grounding presence. "Do not listen," he repeated, his voice strained but firm. "It feeds on your fear, on your despair. Focus on the light, focus on her true self." He began to chant again, louder this time, his voice growing in power and conviction, pouring more holy water, making the sign of the cross repeatedly. The battle was far from over. The entity's words, dripping with venom, burrowed into my mind. Every hope, every dream, gone, and he will be powerless to stop it. It was true. I was powerless. My legs trembled, my vision swam. The crushing weight on my chest intensified, stealing my breath. It was showing me my deepest fear, making me relive every moment of my helplessness.
Look at her, it shrieked through her lips, her beautiful face now a mask of pure evil. Look at what you've allowed to happen. You couldn't protect her then, and you can't protect her now. A wave of despair so profound it was physical washed over me. It felt like an ocean of ice dragging me down, threatening to drown me in its cold, suffocating depths. My grip on the crucifix loosened. This was it. It had won. It had broken me. I was ready to fall, to give up, to let the darkness consume me too. But then, Father Michael's hand tightened on my shoulder, a sudden sharp squeeze that jolted me. "No!" he roared, his voice cutting through the cacophony of the room, through the entity's taunts, through my own spiraling despair. "Do not give it what it craves. She is still in there. She is fighting. Fight with her." His eyes, blazing with an ancient fire, met mine. "Remember her. Remember who she truly is." His words were a lifeline. A tiny spark ignited within the freezing ocean of my despair. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to push past the monstrous image hovering before me, past the guttural voice, past the stench of sulfur. I forced myself to remember her laugh, the warmth of her hand in mine, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the scent of her hair, the quiet comfort of her presence. Not the demon's mockery, but her, the woman I loved, the woman I had promised to protect. The entity seemed to sense this shift. It shrieked again, a sound of pure frustration and fury. "Fool! She is gone! I am all that remains!" It thrashed violently, its suspended body twisting and convulsing, the air around it crackling with dark energy. The room plunged into near darkness, the single lamp flickering erratically, casting grotesque dancing shadows. The cold became unbearable, a biting, gnawing chill that seemed to penetrate my very bones. But I held on to the memory, on to the image of her true self, with every fiber of my being. I opened my eyes, no longer seeing the demon, but seeing her trapped within its grasp, struggling, fighting. And a new feeling surged through me, not fear, but a desperate, burning rage. Rage at this thing that had stolen her, that had twisted her, that had dared to mock our love. "You lie!" I screamed, my voice raw, hoarse, but filled with a sudden, unexpected power. I didn't know where it came from. "She is not gone. She is still there, and you will not have her." I raised the crucifix, not just clutching it, but holding it out, as if it were a weapon, pointing it directly at the writhing form. As I did, a faint, almost imperceptible light seemed to emanate from the silver, a tiny defiance against the overwhelming darkness. Father Michael, seeing my resolve, intensified his efforts. His chanting grew louder, more urgent, the ancient Latin words flowing like a river of fire. He splashed holy water again, not just a gentle spray, but a violent arc, drenching the hovering figure. This time, the reaction was different. The entity didn't just hiss, it burned. Smoke billowed from her skin where the water touched, not just faint wisps, but thick, acrid plumes that filled the room, making my eyes water and my throat burn. A guttural scream ripped from her lips, a sound of unimaginable pain, a sound that was somehow less like the demon and more like a human being in torment. It was a scream that tore at my heart, but also fueled my resolve. She was in there. She was hurting.
The entity recoiled further, slamming against the ceiling, then dropping with a sickening thud onto the shredded mattress. It writhed, convulsing uncontrollably, its black eyes rolling wildly. The oppressive weight in the room seemed to fracture, momentarily lifting, allowing me to take a full, gasping breath. The air, though still foul, felt marginally lighter. Father Michael didn't hesitate. He seized the moment, stepping forward, his voice a thunderclap. "By the power of the Most High, by the blood of the Lamb, I command you, foul spirit, release this soul, return to the abyss from whence you came." He pressed the crucifix against her forehead, his other hand holding the open book, his chanting reaching a fever pitch. The contact was agonizing. The entity shrieked again, a cacophony of sound that shattered the remaining lamp, plunging the room into total darkness, save for the faint glow from the crucifix. The bed shook violently. The entire house seemed to groan under the strain. I could hear tearing sounds, ripping, as if something was being violently wrenched free. The stench of sulfur intensified to an almost unbearable degree, mingled now with something else, something foul and metallic, like burnt flesh. Her body arched impossibly, her back bending to an angle that should have snapped her spine. Her black eyes bulged, then slowly, agonizingly, began to recede, revealing glimpses of the familiar blue beneath. A desperate gurgling sound escaped her throat, a sound of choked, broken words. "Get out." It was her voice, weak, terrified, but undeniably hers. My heart leaped, a desperate, frantic hope blooming in my chest. "Fight it, my love," I screamed, my own voice cracking. "Fight it, you're stronger than it is." The entity roared one last ear-splitting, unholy sound. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated hatred and defeat, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. A wave of pure, concentrated malice slammed into me, knocking me back against the doorframe, winded. My vision exploded with white light, then darkness. I hit my head hard, and for a moment, the world went silent. When my senses returned, the room was eerily quiet. The sulfur smell was fading, replaced by the faint, sweet scent of lilies. The cold was gone. The oppressive weight had vanished. Father Michael stood over the bed, breathing heavily, the crucifix still clutched in his hand, the book closed. And on the bed, lying still, pale, and utterly exhausted, was her, my beloved. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, albeit streaked with grime and tears. The black was gone, the contortions were gone. She was just sleeping. But I knew, deep in my soul, that something profound had happened. The battle was over. For now. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound, a vacuum where the chaos had been. Father Michael helped me up, his hand steady, but I could feel the tremor in his fingers. He looked exhausted, decades older than when he arrived. He didn't speak much then, just murmured a blessing over her, over the room, and over me. He said the entity was banished, for now. "But remember, my son," he warned, his voice a dry rasp, "evil leaves its mark, and sometimes it waits." He left a few hours later, a ghost slipping into the pre-dawn gloom, leaving me alone with the shattered room and the woman I loved, sleeping soundly for the first time in months. She woke up the next morning, confused, disoriented, with no memory of the weeks of horror, only fragmented nightmares of being trapped, of cold and darkness. We never spoke of it in detail. How could we? How do you tell someone what wore their face, what twisted their body, what spoke with their voice? She recovered slowly. The physical scars faded. The house was cleaned, repaired, though I could never quite get rid of the faint, cloying scent that seemed to linger in the floorboards, in the very walls. But the other scars, those remain. I still watch her sometimes, when she's laughing, when she's quiet, searching her eyes for any flicker of that ancient darkness. Every shadow that stretches too long, every unexpected chill, Every creak in the night sends a jolt of ice through me. Father Michael was right. Evil leaves its mark. It didn't just touch her, it touched me. It changed me. I see the world differently now, knowing what lurks beneath the surface. What can wear the guise of someone you love? The peace we found is a fragile thing, constantly guarded, constantly threatened by the echo of that voice, those eyes. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is utterly silent, I wonder if it's truly gone, or if it's just waiting, patiently, for another moment of weakness, another opportunity to return. Have you ever faced something that left you questioning everything you thought you knew? Something that whispered secrets only you should know, leaving you forever marked? Because the truth is, some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. And some echoes, once heard, never truly fade.